Greetings and welcome to the 22nd, or possibly the 23rd, episode of Morrowind Modding Interviews. With me today is CowGuru, the author of the very popular and very amusing Muffinwind quest mod. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview.
Glad to be here.
And moving right into our first set of intro questions, when did you first start playing Morrowind and the Elder Scrolls in general?
I first started playing Morrowind in 2003, and it was actually my introduction to PC gaming, which will answer your second question there. And it was like nothing I'd ever played before, which is probably how I came to be here today.
Oh yes, Morrowind was a very unique game at the time, sort of like the Odd World series of games, to my mind. And it was certainly a standout for the Elder Scrolls series, which up until that time was more of a traditional fantasy series.
Yes, it certainly was, and I knew nothing about the Elder Scrolls before that point. I was 12, and actually how I came to Morrowind was, I was posting on the Game FAQs forums, because that's what happened on the internet in 2003, and I just saw someone talking about it, and it piqued my interest, so I looked into it, and people were talking about these mods that people were making for it, and I had no idea what that was. So the rest was history, I suppose.
Oh yes, that's typically how it happens, and with this next question here, I'm kind of curious, how much of the original Morrowind have you played through over the years, and how long after starting playing Morrowind did it take you to get an itch to mod it, so to speak?
Right, for how much of it I've played, I'm going to say it's in thousands of hours. It was over the course of years, but yeah, I played a lot of it, and I couldn't begin to tell you exactly how much. As for getting the itch to mod it, I think it was actually before I even got the game, because, like I say, I was first drawn to Morrowind with people talking about these mods. I didn't have a computer, really, so I was just reading about it in school, or whatever, whenever I got access to the internet. And my imagination just ran wild. It was like, I was used to my Nintendo 64 and my GameCube up to that point, so reading about this huge world where you could do anything, and the slightest things, I think especially at that age, just set your imagination off. Stories about this Lord Vivek and his big temple that you could just go and visit any time, and it's like, he sounds like a final boss. You know, that sounds amazing, and you can just go and do these things. So I started reading about mods, and all the things people do with them. Is this possible? So I think by the time I got the game, it was already very firmly planted in my mind. I have to get into this. I have to get into this modding business.
On a sort of similar note, what was your first mod, and how did you get the idea for it?
Right. My first mod cannot be found anywhere online, as far as I'm aware. And I'm not going to name it just in case that's not true. I made it when I was 12. It was about, I can't even remember how it started. It was supposedly a quest mod, and I got as far as copying and pasting the interior of Nurano Manor. I messed up one of the corners of it and couldn't get it back into place properly, so I decided that the plot from then on would be about some sort of god who lived in the holes between spaces and walls. And then you meet her in Dagothar's chamber. And I cannot remember what happened there, but it's not something I hold as a highlight of my modding career.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of modders have projects that were sort of similar to that. I remember my first half dozen mods or so were absolutely terrible. I actually had the unfortunate idea to release them, and thankfully I've since taken them all down and they can't be found on the internet anymore.
Yeah, I did have this up on Morrowind Summit, if you remember that, which was a good site. I miss Morrowind Summit, but I don't miss any attempts at modding being available for all to see. I still remember actually Miles Acreus, I think he was a prominent reviewer at the time, and he made a lot of good mods, like Beyond Yiskramor, was a really good one, a really good quest mod of the early days of Morrowind. And he gave me the cutting review that stated, I have all the modding skill of Ray Charles. And it stuck with me once my 12-year-old self had Googled who Ray Charles was, but yeah, that is thankfully all now consigned to history.
Oh yes, I really miss the Morrowind Summit website as well. That to me always seems like the epitome of what the ideal Morrowind modding website ought to be. Sort of this perfect combination of mods and mod reviews. Especially, I liked how the mod reviewers were actually sort of ranked and were given sort of titles for how well they wrote reviews for modding.
Yes, definitely it was. I guess it was back when Morrowind Modding was a really small, tight-knit community, and it still is, or it is again, but you knew everyone, you knew all the reviewers in the comments, and I actually became quite good friends with one of them in particular, Lord Devil, or Quatlus, as I knew her. And obviously she passed away quite a few years ago, but I just remember seeing her reviews, and again, before I even got Morrowind, and they were just another element of this weird new world that I was about to discover. And we started talking, obviously, once I got into Morrowind, and me being 12, she being old and clever, just gave me a lot of advice that I still haven't really forgotten. And there were a lot of characters like that around in those days. There was a lot of community that you can't really get back, I suppose.
Oh yes, and at the risk of being a bit nostalgic, I also remember Quatlos, and she left a particularly harsh but constructive review on one of my early mods, which is sort of what made me stop and start, actually looking into quality control before I release something on the internet.
Yeah, that sounds like her. I actually remember the first mod that I released that is still out there was Geob Companion, as it was imaginatively titled, and I released it under my internet name at the time, Jim Bob 11, which I continue to use in most places, but I get banned under it on the Elder Scrolls forums for being underage, so I'm CowGuru to most people there. But it was years later when I look back at Geob Companion, it had like twice as many downloads as Muffinwind ever got. Something I rustled up in about a few hours with the help of scripting for dummies and Grumpy's companion scripts. And Quatlus had left a long comment asking if I could implement Geob Romance. So that was interesting.
Oh yeah, it was definitely interesting to go back and see an old mod and see how popular or not popular it has become. That was one of the special things about Morrowind Summit Planet Elder Scrolls I always really enjoyed. And, well, just sort of moving off of this nostalgic track here, what draws you to modding video games?
I guess. Well, I've always been a huge gamer, so what drew me to modding Morrowind in particular was just the way I got into it via finding out about these amazing mods and what you could do with them. Now, the construction set, no construction set could ever live up to my 12-year-old creative mind's idea of what you could possibly do with these things, but it immediately set off my imagination, and I've always liked writing stories, making mods, things like that, just keeping my imagination active, being creative. So I couldn't wait to make mods, and when I got into it, I found it really rewarding, and I like being part of the community. I like being part of this creative community that, for the most part, work together to just work on a common interest and make something better out of it.
Oh yeah, definitely. The Morrowind modding community has always been very friendly, and I think it has a lot to do with our creative personality. Is that games like this, they attract very creative people, and very creative people tend to work well together. At least in my experience.
I think that's definitely true, and for me at least, and probably for a lot of other people, Morrowind was a bit of an escape. I never played MMOs, but it probably scratched kind of the same itch. I got it around the time that, believe it or not, I was getting deeply unpopular going into high school, and Morrowind was just a world I was happy to retreat into, which is probably a big part of my love for it today, but I don't think that's all. It is a great game. I think I would love it anyway, but it did get to me at a certain time when I could just immerse myself in it completely, and it turns out I could meet a community of real people who were friendly and welcoming that I could take part in. So I just jumped into that wholesale, and unlike a lot of um, incidents where people jump into the internet as an escape from real life, I think it was actually good for me because I developed my creative skills, I worked with people, and I'll remember a lot of the people that I met during that time for a long time to come. It was great, and it makes me kind of sad that modding communities now, like for Skyrim or whatever, are so huge that you're never going to get that kind of intimacy again. Like the big Skyrim mods have millions of downloads. You would not get that in the Morrowind times, and if that's how popular it's gotten, and that's great, then it does lose some of the intimacy, which is kind of sad.
Oh yes, the Morrowind Modding Community is always sort of on the that community where everyone knows your name. You know, kind of like a friendly bar you walk into.
That is exactly how I think of it. It's, well, I saw someone say a long time ago, but it's always stuck with me that, God, it's going to sound really nerdy, but other games are an adventure. Morrowind is home. And I kind of see what they mean because it's a game I can just return to and explore. Like I can wander about Balmora knowing where everyone's house is, knowing where everything is, but I can still just chill out there. Whereas I play a new RPG now or something, I get into a town and I'm immediately thinking, where's the quests? Where's the one or two hidden secrets? And maybe that's my fault, but I think it's a lot to do with just when I got into it and the memories it brings, I guess. But it does have that special quality that I will defend.
Oh yeah, definitely. I've always thought of Resdane as being sort of a home as well, and I know a lot of other Morrowind modders have. And you know, the thing you mentioned right there is, you know, something I've experienced as well. It's like with a lot of newer games, it's like I'm more task oriented instead of just immersing myself in the world. And I don't know if that's just a design of more modern games to make you want to be more task oriented, to find things and then do things and then move on. But it does seem like that a particular quality of Morrowind where you just want to linger around and enjoy yourself has kind of disappeared in newer games.
Yeah, it's a shame. Even in RPG resurgence recently, and games like Divinity Original Sin, Wasteland 2, Pillars of Eternity, but I do still feel like it's not the same. I'm still looking out for quest givers, merchants. I'm going through the motions and getting everything done. And I think a big part of that, in fairness, is I don't have the time anymore. You know, I'm working now, working 9 to 5. I get a few hours, if I'm lucky, per night to play games. And I just want to actually see the content. So it's probably partially my fault. It's probably partially all of our faults for daring to grow up. And nothing's ever going to be quite as carefree as the games we played when we were younger. But Morrowind still managed to establish a really cohesive world that you were happy to live in. And not many games have matched that. Not since and not before.
Oh yes, very true. And well, just sort of moving on to some more specific modding questions. This first question I have for you is from Otterclock on our Morrowind Modding Showcases forums. And your probably best well-known mod is the classic epic Muffinwind adventure mod released way back in the mid to late 2000s. And I was just sort of curious, what gave you the idea to make that mod in the first place?
Okay, it was a very very interesting situation. Basically, it was around 2004, I think it started. So much as it felt like at the time that Morrowind was well into its maturity, this was early days of Morrowind modding, especially considering that it's still going on. And someone had pointed out on the Morrowind mods board on the official forums that the muffin that you can find in an orc's pocket on a plantation, the something plantation. You can find a muffin, but it's just a loaf of bread with a different name. It's just an Easter egg. So they suggested that it be given a unique model, a unique muffin model. So someone made the muffin model very quickly, and the thread turned into a lot of joking about how this should be expanded further, how someone should make a muffin based quest mod, how there should be a whole new landmass devoted to muffins. And but halfway through, I popped in, I can't even remember what I was actually thinking, and said, "Hey, I'll make the Muffin Quest mod." And everyone was still thinking this was all a bit of a joke. They were like, "Oh, you should call it." The first suggestion was Morrow Muffin. So I said Muffinwind, and the response was, "No, Morrow Muffin sounds better." So at that point, I just agreed to disagree and went off to make it by myself. And it was weeks later that anyone actually realised I was actually making this.
Well, it's certainly a bit of a unique mod, and speaking of Muffinwind, it's one of really only a few mods in the sort of comedy and satire category. And I've noticed there really isn't a whole lot of mods in this field outside of, say, the mods you see in the Making Friends in Morrowind video. And do you think modders should try to make more comedic mods like this? That just are sort of spur-of-the-moment things, like your mod was?
Absolutely. But comedy in games is very hard to pull off well, so I understand why people don't. But it is still disappointing how few people try. I think modders sometimes feel the need to keep comedic elements and dramatic elements, story elements separate, otherwise one might compromise the other, and I don't think like that at all. Now, I've always been open about how much Terry Pratchett had influenced my work, and he was an absolute master of blending both into one another seamlessly. It's also more understandable in a game like Morrowind than when you're modding something more, well, modular, like Neverwinter Nights. And indeed, Neverwinter Nights does have a lot more in the way of comedic modules, because with Neverwinter Nights, each module is its own game, its own world. So you start in the areas created by the module and you can't access the main game or anything. So it's easier to create sort of self-contained comedy. But Morrowind modders have to face the question of whether they want to integrate their mods well into the game world, which means less potential for humour, though not none by any means, or to make something totally lore-breaking, which a lot of people don't like. And it is a tough choice. I understand why people avoid it. Personally, I just can't help but insert comedy into things I write or do, which is probably a weakness, but I try to keep it appropriate. I don't really like the random monkey cheese type humour, despite what the Muffinwind premise might have you believe. It's obviously an absurd mod, but absurd and random aren't the same. I do try to make the humour flow organically, and whether I succeed or not is up to the player. There's a lot in the way of genuinely funny games coming out these days, though I think things are improving in that regard. It's mostly from indie studios like Barclay Shut Up and Jam Gaiden or the Stanley Parable, so I'm hoping they influence more comedic mods in the future because I think there's a huge well there that people aren't exploring as much as they could.
Oh yes, and I have to say that I absolutely loved your comedic humor in Muffinwind, and I'm kind of curious. Do you think you're ever going to be tempted to maybe create a sequel for Muffinwind? I mean, recently there was a new mod on the Nexus called Waffle Warfare, which added in Doomer Waffle Launchers. Yes, that's what it was called, and also Waffle Atronox and a bunch of other waffle-related items. And do you think that maybe there would be room there for a Wafflewind sequel?
I did see that actually. It was Melchior something, and he did a competition to see what he would model next. And whoever it was suggested that. I saw the video and I did very much appreciate that. But regarding a sequel, I was planning a big one for Oblivion when it came out. And it was probably overly optimistic looking back on it now. It probably would never have happened, but it was going to be a total conversion set on a destroyed Vardenfell, set in terrible things having happened in the aftermath of Muffinwind, and it was going to be called Muffinwind to the Cakes of Wrath. And all I really remember from my plot outline was that the main villain, Rasputin, was going to return and he was going to have some very angry cakes. But when Oblivion came out, and I didn't like it as much, the idea did just kind of. I have kept an eye on modding over the years, and I would be up for coming back to it, but whether it would be a sequel to Muffinwind or not remains to be seen. I did try to tie up the plot in Snakes on a Plane of Oblivion, and if there's anything further to come of it, remains to be seen.
Oh yes, I have absolutely no idea where Melkor got that crazy idea for a waffle mod, but it would be really quite something to see some the same sort of content that you find in Muffinwind with waffles, giant man eating waffles and waffle armor and all these other crazy things that you included with Muffinwind. I think would just work really well with waffles. I mean, it's a classic breakfast item.
Absolutely. It's great to have someone like that around just making things like that, because I remember when I was making Muffinwind, I did have the dilemma actually going to get models, animations for new enemies, muffin enemies. And without me actually having put out the request, completely apropos of nothing, Alien Sloth, I think it was, or Sloth, or The Sloth, or whatever she goes by now, just popped into the thread and said, "Hey, I made all these evil muffin creatures and animated them." I was like, "Oh, you've completely improved my mod 100%, and I didn't even ask you beforehand. Thanks."
Oh yes, that's a pretty amusing story, really, and it just goes to showcase the sort of creative, cooperative nature of the Morrowind modding community, especially back then. And my next question here is: it has to be said that your mods are really quite creative and, of course, brilliantly done for a good laugh. But I'm sort of curious, where do you get your ideas and/or inspirations from for the jokes in your mods?
I guess they come from a lot of places, really. I mean, all comedy comes from somewhere. It could be something that I want to satirise, whether playfully or critically. It could be a theme that I've been mulling over and want to include. It could be something that just arises organically from the situations I've set up for quests or areas. Or it could just be something that I've found funny myself recently and want to try my own take on. I've kind of lost my taste for references and shit for own sake, although Muffinwind still has its share of those that I've left in the enhanced edition because my intent with it was never to just completely tear up the original so much as just refine it. So I think a good one to look at is actually Snakes on an Oblivion plane. Now, the main inspiration for that was obviously the infamous movie, but that's only in the very basic level of aeroplane slash Oblivion plane. Haha, very funny. Snakes as enemies, and the journey with a party of oddball characters. More elaborately, my idea with it was to go through a series of sort of vignettes, and it was partially influenced by an idea I had for a vignette type RPG, which in turn was inspired by thinking about the first Fallout game actually, in which everything is very separated, very segmented. You go from town to town, area to area, and each of them has kind of self-contained problems, self-contained themes. Every area presents its own clearly defined scenario and theme, and you have to make a series of choices that will create a self-contained outcome for that town. That gave me the idea for a game or a mod that more openly just takes you from scenario to scenario, heat of the moment to heat of the moment, giving you these dense, rich areas that are nonetheless self-contained, which seemed like a solution to the kind of feature creep problem that comes into a lot of mods and RPGs. And for me, it presented the opportunity to satirise, send up, or just play around with any given idea. So I had an idea, I had an area taking the piss out of Oblivion's Shivering Isles expansion, which I'd just finished a Let's Play of, and I didn't enjoy much. I'd just seen someone try a scripting experiment to get a working implementation of a Minesweeper board stuck to a wall in Morrowind, and my immediate thought was I could flip that on its head and have an actual giant Minesweeper board that the player has to carefully pick his way across. And the ending is just kind of a traditional slapstick scenario inspired by British comedy like Fawlty Towers, where a series of bungles roll together to cause hilarious calamity. I found it good for kind of the making of a comedic mod because it let me move on from something I felt wasn't working without cutting out huge chunks in the mod. And if my head just wasn't in the right place for a certain kind of humour that day, I could go and work in another area and not force the humour.
Oh yeah, there are a lot of really memorable scenes from Snakes on a Plane of Oblivion, especially that Minesweeper bit. That was something that really stuck out to me. And this is a question you've already kind of answered, and it's a question from Tierlick on our Morrowind Modding Showcases forums. Will you ever make more hilarious and needed mods like Muffinwind and Snakes on a Plane of Oblivion?
All I can say is, it depends. I've done stuff in a lot of, without sounding pretentious, a lot of creative fields. Basically, I've done Let's Plays, creative writing, my mods, Gary's mod comics. What I do next does just depend on what I take a notion for. At the moment, I've got a novel on my mind that I've been toying with writing for a while, because I've always kept my work kind of online based and not very serious. Possibly out of a fear of sort of criticism or self doubt, because if someone says my story sucks, my comic isn't funny, I can just shrug it off and say it's just a dumb online thing I do in my spare time. But the reality is, I do put a lot of myself into everything that I do, and I kind of take a pride in it, so I think it's time I take a stab at something more ambitious. So I'm between writing or I do have mods in mind for actually Divinity Original Sin, but probably the upcoming sequel if it has better mod tools, because it will really have to have better mod tools if I'm going to do anything. I've got an idea for basically in the present timeline of the Divinity games, the main antagonist is Damien, a hilariously evil man that was brought up by the protagonist of the first game and was good in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way, because the games are tongue-in-cheek. So I'm thinking that a really interesting mod to explore would be Damien the college years, because it's during college that he gets seduced to evil. So I'm thinking give this really small, concentrated college area, lots of classes, lots of school factions that you can join and work with, lots of choices and consequences as a result, and see where the player can go with that. I think there's a lot of potential in there, but it just depends what the tool set is like and what I feel like making. I would like to make the Muffinwind sequel, but much as I quite enjoy Skyrim, I don't really like the modern Bethesda games enough to spend so long and put so much of myself into making really long, epic mods for them. It just wouldn't come out well, and I don't think I would do the best job of it.
Oh yes, that certainly sounds like a really interesting mod idea, and I have to say that as a Morrowind modder, the Divinity Original Sin construction set has often looked very attractive, though unfortunately I haven't quite gotten around to playing Divinity Original Sin. My Kickstarter copy of the game is still sitting on my hard drive, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, without going too off topic here, Original Sin is great, especially now that the Enhanced Edition is out. I would definitely give it a play, but the construction set, or whatever they call it, leaves something to be desired. But they promised in the Kickstarter for the sequel that if they reach a certain tier, certain stretch goal, they would get an outside studio in to make their construction set as good as it could possibly be. They did reach that, so I'm looking forward to seeing what happens.
Now, sort of going on to, well, not really a more specific modding question, but this is another question from AutoClock, and considering that we have a major community project going on right now called ModTown 2015, would you at all be interested in joining up with that project?
All I can say is leave it with me. At the moment, I'm really busy in work, but I'm actually only in my job until the end of March, and I don't think March will be as busy, so I would like to contribute if possible. So all I can say is watch this space. If I join in, I will let y'all know.
Well, that's certainly good to hear. And going on to our more general modding question segment, do you do any major planning before you start a mod? And if yes, how?
Well, When I started Muffinwind, no. It was my first venture into the construction set, and well, at the time it felt like a lifetime. In fact, it had been about a year. But I just wanted to initially make a small, silly quest mod. But the more I got into it, the more encouragement I got, the bigger it got until it ended up with what we have now. And that's a common story. I try to plan ahead when I do things like that now, but the most honest answer is I haven't made a mod in enough time that I would plan them out way more in advance next time, because it does just make everything go a lot easier. So to anyone looking at making mods, I would recommend plan things out. Have a second opinion on how things are going, because especially if you're looking at a lot of dialogue, a lot of choices and consequences, things branch off and quickly become 6 times the work you were initially thinking of. So when I look at what I did with Muffinwind and Snakes in a Plane a lot of the time, I'm thinking, oh god, why did you not plan ahead with that? So in answer to the question, I would say I never used to plan ahead much, but I learned my lesson, and in future, well,
Oh yes, quest dialogue especially is well something that I like to personally plan out ahead of time. I do like having lots of multiple endings of my quests, so having a central document of all these of all the different branching quests and endings is definitely something that is helpful in that particular regard.
it certainly is. The importance of planning to these things cannot be overestimated. And I'm lucky enough now that my girlfriend is very supportive of all the stupid, crazy, creative shit I do. So, and she has a far better head for numbers and planning than me, so I can usually bounce things off her and she'll say, have you thought about this? And my answer is usually no, and then I plan it on pain of death.
Now, this next question is, well, kind of on a similar note. It's another question from Autoclock, and is there anything about modding that you dislike?
There are a couple of things. For one, I dislike scripting. It's just, I'm not very good at the whole programming side of things. And when it comes to scripting, I just have to try my best, ask for help, take scripts from more capable people, and then ask their permission. I'm just not good at the programming side of things, which isn't great when you want to make complicated quests, but it's just not something I have a knack for. The other thing I dislike about modding, and it's going to be a slightly controversial statement, but I think a lot of the time when you get deep into the modding community, despite, I think it especially stings with Morrowind because the community is so friendly, so welcoming, so cooperative. So occasionally you get people that their ego gets in the way of making the mods, making the game that we all want to see. And I get, you make something, it's your pride and joy. You don't want people just stealing it and using it without permission. That's terrible. But there are a lot of people who they can't take criticism. I don't know. I think egos just get in the way a lot of the time of everyone working together. And it's kind of sad to see because if we put them aside, we could make way better mods than we do. We could have far greater collaborative efforts than we do. And I've seen a lot of group projects fall apart because people have had their one true vision for the project that can't be managed. And they just can't compromise. And it's so sad all the time.
Oh yes, we certainly have had a few modders who have left the community over the years and then took down all the mods immediately at the same time. And, that's always the kind of the risk with tight-knit modding communities, is that there's always going to be a slight undertone of drama, which is a bit unfortunate, but probably unavoidable.
It probably is. I mean, you get enough creative types in one place, you're going to have drama. And in a tight knit modding community like this, hurt feelings are going to they're not going to go unheard. Let's put it that way. And it's a shame, but I guess the price you pay for having a collection of what I will genuinely say is wonderfully talented and creative people is you're going to get a few interesting personalities and people that you either have to learn to work with or not work with. And it's a constant struggle that won't go away. But it's a shame when we lose a lot of good work, when we lose a good person in the modding community because someone has started drama, started jealousy over nothing, really. It's happened time and time again, and it's going to keep happening, but we can do better than that.
Oh yes, that's always the hope that we can do better. But going on to this next question here, have you been influenced by any non-Elder Scrolls games when you mod? And you already kind of answered this a little bit in some of our previous questions.
I think I draw a lot of influence from a lot of places. I played a lot of Neverwinter Nights mods back in the day as well, so I think, especially with Muffinwind, I was possibly wrongly inspired by Neverwinter Nights' focus on dialogue, on doing actions during dialogue, that sort of thing, that ultimately it works a bit better in an engine like that than it does in the Morrowind engine. But also seeing a lot of the creative, imaginative, and quite artistic mods that people could make for Neverwinter Nights as well. I probably brought that into my Morrowind modding, and ultimately Morrowind is always going to be my favourite game and my favourite modding community, but there's a lot of that in there, and there's a lot of, I guess, older RPGs. I try to put in a strain of Fallout, Planescape Torment, games like that. I think we're all influenced by something when we make something new, and I like to think that the mods that I make aren't just a compilation of the other things I've played. I think my biggest influence is other Morrowind modders and wanting to do the kind of things they made.
On a sort of similar note, are there any modders who have inspired or influenced you in some way? And if so, what was it about their work that inspired you?
Oh, there's a lot more than I can name, to be honest, because having talked about earlier in the interview, I'm looking at mods, playing mods back in 2003 or so. I couldn't tell you all the mods that I used when I first played Morrowind, that I got into, that I just liked the idea of. Even Giants, which anyone who was around in 2003, 2004 remembers being quite controversial. Even looking at that, I was like, this is amazing. He's putting in all these monsters that he's made himself. Turns out he stole most of them from other games, but I'll say I was probably mostly influenced by probably the big orders. I think the Tommy Cadgett that made the Black Mill. The Black Mill's one of my old favourites because I remember staying up all night on my 56k connection to download the Black Mill because it was a very big download. It was 30 megabytes. And when I played it, it was amazing. It was just all totally new scripting, new areas, new models, the kind of thing, kids these days take for granted. But to me, it was amazing. And I guess all of the old Quest mods like that really expanded the boundaries of what you could do with Morrowind. So that Vivek's Fate, the Black Queen Chronicles, Suran Underworld, all the people that really pushed the boundaries of quest and dialogue, and people like I'm going to say the modders that came before us and have passed away, like Grumpy, who made his companion scripts, who tirelessly helped people with scripting. He helped me a lot personally, and I'm indebted to him, but he passed away a long time ago. And Quarrel, who made the Underground, much as I'll always bear a grudge against him for saying, what the hell is this Morrowind with muffins in it? What has our modding community come to? The Underground was a fantastic mod for its time, for its scale. And just people like that pushed the boundaries, I think, of what you could actually put in Morrowind.
Oh yeah, those were a lot of really just great quest mods. Some of my favorites from the early days, and the Underground, Wizard's Island, the Black Mill. And the thing is that they still look really good today with modern day Morrowind graphics upgrades. They look absolutely fantastic, and they still play pretty good as well. And it's just been fascinating to just sort of return to those same locations that I visited in my youth and still be blown away by all this new content and all these new areas.
It is. It's really great because you get a different perspective on it. Like I play the Black Mill now, and I can see the holes in it, the problems with it, like NPCs named after people that were posting on Tommy Cadgett's forums, including numbers in their name and everything. And I think that didn't even bother me when I first played this, and it doesn't bother me now because it's now just a total nostalgia trip. You can see how much was put into this quite a long time ago in internet terms. Yes, Wizards Islands was amazing. Like I saw it when it was in development, and everyone was just like, "This isn't going to happen. This is too ambitious. It's too big. People are having arguments. This is never going to be released." And while it's a shame that only Chapter One was released, but Chapter One was amazing, and it's still amazing. It was a couple of years ago. I replayed Morrowind and I made a point of playing Wizards Islands and a couple of the other big quest mods. And Wizards Islands is still incredible. It's incredible the effort and creativity that went into something like that.
Oh yes, and I think these big quest mods, especially like Wizard's Island, are one of the big draws for Morrowind because you don't get as many of these big quest mods in the later Elder Scrolls games, certainly. And Morrowind just already has so many of them because of its long history of quest mod development. And going into the future, there's probably going to be several more. I don't know if you saw it or not, but Melkor has also released a major landmass mod, and which will eventually be a major quest mod called Lithodonia, which is on a completely massive scale.
Yes, I saw Lithodonia actually, and I love when people release landmasses, areas like that, modest resources generally, because it's something that just feeds into this community continuing to go on, making new things, making new mods. And I think there is a lot of opportunity there. Melchior's a great modder, and I'm looking forward to seeing what people do with it. I think a lot of new quest mods, new big content mods like that, they do go a bit overlooked. Like there was one a couple of years ago that I never did play myself, I have to admit. It was called Seven Keys of Azura or something. And it was this whole new landmass with a whole new main quest, but it seems to have sank without a trace, and maybe that's because it was terrible, I don't know, but I think I'll say this as a quest modder, as a content modder. A lot of the time, new quest mods don't get that kind of good reception. Not that they don't get a good reception, just that people aren't quite as interested in them. And that seems to be something that's happened in Morrowind kind of later days with modding. I don't really know where that's come from, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I suppose it is kind of true that the focus these days has been more on graphics upgrades for Morrowind rather than quest mods. It does seem like when a graphics upgrade mod gets released, it gets a much wider reception than a quest mod, and I guess part of that has to do with Morrowind's age. People really want to play the game with updated graphics, and it's something that's quick and very noticeable when you install it. A quest mod might take a while, especially a large quest mod. Another one that was released a few years ago that probably didn't get as much attention as it should have was Keening, which was another really big landmass-based quest mod. I think that was released in 2011, maybe 2012. And yeah, I do think there's a bigger focus on graphics mods these days.
It's understandable. I think a lot of people playing mods now are either people that played Morrowind years and years ago, and they're looking for the 2016 edition. They're looking to get everything upgraded, smoothed out, and to experience the game the way they imagine it having been years ago. And the other big group of people playing it now are people that are playing it for the first time and want to make it look acceptable for this day and age. So it's understandable that that's where the focus has gone, but speaking entirely selfishly, as a quest/content modder, I do feel like more could be done to expand what's actually happening in Morrowind. Like the one you mentioned, Queening, I've never even heard of it. And back in the day, I played every new content mod that was out there because I had no life. But I just played everything, more and more content. I could never get enough. And there doesn't seem to be as much of that these days.
Oh yes, and I have to say that probably the part of it has to do with, us being old-time Morrowind players. I mean, when you've been playing the same game for 13 years, you just kind of want more content. I'm going to steal a quote here from Superstar, and what she said is, I don't want Morrowind to be different, I just want more of Morrowind. And I pretty much feel the exact same way in that regard.
That is exactly how I feel. I want things that capture more of the same Morrowind atmosphere, or even things that just kind of expand what you expect to experience in Morrowind. There's a lot of off the wall quest mods. I mean, I might have made a few of them myself, but I like when they challenge your kind of preconceptions about what a Morrowind mod can be. I remember one, for some reason, one that comes to mind is Lothavor's Legacy, and that's an old mod now, but I'm sure it came out around 2006, so around when I felt like a bit of a veteran of the Morrowind scene. But it was really focused on basically you're trapped on this small island, you're forced to interact with, bond with, or the opposite with, and that all came to affect the ending, a lot of choices and consequences. It was like something between Myst and a really old school role playing game where it was just interacting with a few characters and your choices matter. And I remember even thinking then, this is different from Morrowind, but it does fit. It fits with how I see the game. And it's brilliant. It's still probably one of my favourite mods for what it did. But again, you don't really see people talking about it now, whereas texture replacers and everything, they stand the test of time because obviously whenever you install it, you put in your texture replacers, you make the game look as good as you can because it's from 2002. That's only understandable.
Oh yes, I also loved Thor's Legacy, and you gotta love those purple eyes. But, I wouldn't exactly say that it hasn't gotten any attention. I mean, it was the number one pick in our top 10 Quest Mods video from a few months ago. So there are still people who are looking at it today and playing it today, and it's still available for download from Morrowind's Modding History, though. Again, not the problem with these older Quest mods is that they're only available on Morrowind Modding History, and not Morrowind Nexus, and people go to Morrowind Nexus for their Morrowind mod fix these days, which is kind of unfortunate, because most mods are still on Morrowind Modding History, and not the Nexus.
Yeah, that is definitely, it's a huge problem for getting new people into Morrowind because you you give them, for example, the Morrowind 2014-2015 guide, or whatever it's called, quite a popular page, and it just directs people through downloading all the appropriate upgrades, updates, mods, the Morrowind overhaul, and everything like that. And that's fine, but when you actually want to direct someone to a particular mod and say, this is great, you really need to check this out, the response is, where the hell can I get it? It's on this tiny Morrowind modding history page. And the people who curate it do a great job, but it's a shame, again, that we don't have a kind of Morrowind Summit equivalent that's going to stay around and keep that kind of thing alive with the reviews and so on that we had back in the day. But that was a long time ago now, I guess.
Oh yes, Morrowind Modding History is a fantastic resource, but the problem is that there is no review option, there's no comment option. You don't know if the mod you're downloading is the correct version of the mod, if it's the latest version, or if it has major problems that might corrupt your save game. There's just there needs to be more feedback tools with it, especially, and it also needs greater visibility. I remember hearing that Fligerty actually hides Morrowind modding history from a lot of search engines. So if you tried searching for a mod via Google, you wouldn't actually get the Morrowind modding history link. You'd have to, actually go to the Morrowind modding history webpage, type it into the search browser, and then find it, because it doesn't support any of the robots that go through and do the searches for Google or Bing or whatever the other web search engines are.
Well, I hadn't heard about that before, but if that's actually the case, that's weird. And I do agree with you about I think the lack of accessibility of Morrowind Modding History, because I know that both versions of Muffinwind are up there, for example, Muffinwind and Muffinwind Enhanced Edition. And there's nothing pointing people to the Enhanced Edition. For example, on the Nexus, Morrowind Nexus, I replaced the normal page with a big banner saying, please click here, there is now an Enhanced Edition, this is outdated. Now, I still get the occasional email asking if there's an updated version fixing bugs and that, but these things happen. Whereas in Morrowind Modding History, you can't really curate your own page at all, and I guess it's an archive, so that's how that works, but I think where it really suffers is that there's no kind of contemporary replacement. Morrowind Modding History is it's an archive, and there's no live version to make up for it.
Oh yes, definitely, and something I would love to see in the community is a new Morrowind Summit. Unfortunately, that's probably not going to happen since IGN shut down the Planet of Scrolls page. But it's something that's worth dreaming about.
I would certainly like to see it. Something to bring back that kind of small sense of community as well that Morrowind Summit has. Like, I remember another site, elricem.com. I really enjoyed spending time there, and it shut down after the summit shut down, I think. And then it was just all of the big sites dying off one by one. And that's what happens with an old game, I guess. But I think it would do great things for Morrowind if there was a new kind of central site like that. But we'll have to wait and see if that appears.
Oh yes, and sort of moving on to our other questions. If you could make a single change to the capabilities of the construction set, what would it be?
It's a good question. Now, as I said before, I'm not great at the scripting side of things, so I'm not going to say something like a physics engine because I wouldn't know how to work with a physics engine. I will say I would like the dialogue tool to be better, to be less esoteric, to be less buggy. For example, when I was releasing Muffinwind Enhanced Edition, I encountered a bug with the dialogue system where now there's a results box when you're typing in a line of dialogue where you can see what's going to happen, like update a journal, start a fight, end dialogue, which brings up the goodbye or whatever. Now, whatever was wrong with my install, the last line got cut off, so I spent weeks bug fixing this version of Muffinwind, trying to work out why a lot of my dialogue wouldn't work, and it turns out it did. But you just don't get feedback on that sort of thing. So, again, speaking as someone that focuses on dialogue, I would like a dialogue system that isn't completely insane. But as far as I can tell, that has only gotten worse in subsequent Bethesda games.
Oh yeah, there's often seem to be a lot of issues with the scripting in the construction set, especially the script compiler, and which sort of ties into the dialogue there a bit. But going on to this next question, have you gotten any help from other modders with your mods, and if so, how have other modders helped you?
All I can say is they have been invaluable. I couldn't have done it without the community. I mean, to narrow it down, the first name that comes to mind is Palinurus. Now, when I finally brought Muffinwind out of the oven for beta testing, it was underdone, to put it mildly. I was burned out and I was just impatient to get it released. You know, I was 15, 16, and my patience had run out, which was stupid. It was incomplete, but Palinurus spent weeks walking through it, noting every issue, every problem, every bug he found, advising me on how to get around them, fixing scripting for me. He was an absolute gentleman, and Cenobite was the same. He was fantastic, and from the start of making Muffinwind to beta testing, he was patient as hell with a daft kid that got in over his head and making a very complicated mod, and both of them I have the utmost respect for. Whereas Ganburigan's scripting for dummies was invaluable, though it never did render me anything approaching literate in that area. And the last person I'll name is C_Mirenai. That was a weird one. Basically, a few years ago, I replayed Muffinwind and thought to myself, I want to overhaul this. I wish I could make this in the way that I would make it now. And bear in mind, this was 4 years after its release. Less than a week later, Seamer and I emails me out of nowhere, never spoken to the guy before, though I did know the name, and he asks if I considered patching and updating it because he felt it could be really great with a bit of polish. So that was that. That was my inspiration to dive back in. I'm not superstitious, but that was obviously a sign.
Now, you've already sort of answered this question in some of our previous discussions, but how much do you use the community to get feedback and motivation for your mods?
Yeah, well, like you say, I have kind of answered it previously, but it's absolutely invaluable. I mean, with Muffinwind, the first time I released it, I did put it out there without anywhere near enough testing on my own part. But even since then, the community has been invaluable, and we've talked about how close-knit, how cooperative the Morrowind community is. You know, people just stepped in and gave me fully animated, custom-made models. You would not get that nowadays in a big modding community like Skyrim's. So I can only say I'm really indebted to how the Morrowind community was and how it is again now that Morrowind's quite old, but it still has such a great community that's still going. Like, well, for example, yourself running these interviews. If you were just doing it for YouTube hits or whatever, you'd be doing a Skyrim modding showcase. But there's obviously a lot of people that still just love Morrowind, love the Morrowind modding community. You're part of it, a lot of people are part of it, and I'd like to think that I continue to contribute to it.
Oh yeah, definitely. There is still a huge amount of community support. I mean, you mentioned that example of being provided with models that were fully animated already for Muffinwind, and that sort of thing still kind of happens to a degree. I mean, I've seen Melkor hand out fully animated and finished models before. I've seen Autoclock do it to a degree, and a number of other modders in the community just within the past few months. And there's this just amazing support structure that we have here that I just don't think is really found anywhere else in the larger modding community.
Yeah, it's something that I think has become quite difficult now because it's so much easier to publicize indie games on Steam Greenlight or whatever on Kickstarter. And I think a lot of people who previously would have made mods are now making games. And that's great. That's great for them. It's great for the community. It's really filling in a gap that with the big AAA games industry getting bigger and bigger has been left open. But I think it has left us as modders with a gap to fill because I think there's a lot of people that 12 years ago with Morrowind would have been making mods. They're now making games that are up in Steam Greenlight, and that's great, but it does impact our modding community to some extent.
Oh yes, and with this next question, I'm kind of curious, is there anything you've had to give up to mod, like playing more games or possibly your social life?
I have to say no to that one because most of my mods are released when I didn't really have a big social life. Like, I released both Muffinwind and Snakes on a plane when I was in high school, and I released Muffinwind Enhanced when I was in early uni. So I've been lucky enough that I've been able to mod when I wanted to. And if anything, I have given up modding for those other things. But I've done other things instead of modding. I've written stuff, I've made Gary's mod comics, but I haven't modded much in recent years.
Now, would you say there's any skills that you've learned from modding, and if so, have you been able to use those skills anywhere else?
I would say there absolutely have been. I learned the hard way to plan ahead before embarking on an ambitious project. I've learned not just put something out there without checking it both myself and then through other people, because much as I put Muffinwind out there for beta testing, and it wasn't finished, it wasn't completable, and Palinurus walked me through it and basically fixed everything himself and told me what to do. I would not do that again because I was embarrassed, I would not have sent that out in that state, but I just didn't even think about it. I would never do that again. So I've learned to cooperate with others, and I've learned to test things in my own way. The one thing I probably haven't really learned much about is teamwork, because I'm still a bit of a control freak when it comes to something that's my idea, it's my baby. And that's something that's kind of put me off modding for more recent games, which is my own fault. But everyone that makes a big content mod seems to do it in a team, at the head of a team. There's a lot of people doing a lot of different things, and I'm like, it's not how I do things. I just want to do everything myself. I guess that's a lesson that I still have to learn because I'm not actually good at everything.
Oh yes, it's very tempting, even as a modder, to just be sort of a lone wolf and try and make massive mods by yourself. I know I've gone through that at least once, where I tried to make a giant landmass mod by myself, and I think most modders have probably experienced that to some degree.
Definitely, and again, I think it's something that has really impacted the relative lack of quest mods for Skyrim, Fallout 3, whatever, because I think Morrowind's relative lack of sophistication in that sense works in its favour. You don't need voice actors. You can make parts of the landscape look kind of bare bones, and that's fine because people look past it and use their imaginations. Whereas now in more modern, more realistic games, and the fact that games are like that is a good thing, but people look at these small problems that modders do not have the time, budget, or manpower to deal with, and they go, that's breaking my immersion. That's spoiling my experience. Whereas back in Morrowind times, everything was a bit janky. There were holes, there were bugs, there were crap textures, but now you can't really get away with that. And that's putting a huge burden on modders, on people that are just working in these things in their own time. And there's no other way that these things could have gone, because obviously the more sophisticated things get, the less room there is for your imagination, and the more difficult it will be to rise to the challenge.
Oh yes, and to that extent, Morrowind is kind of in the Goldilocks zone, especially for quest modding. There is just the sort of perfect element for lone wolf modding, that quest modders don't have to do a whole lot of extra production work, well, like with voice acting. But there's also room for major team projects in quest mods as well.
Yes, because the fact is, you can do these things if you want. Like, Wizards Islands was a huge team project, and to this day, it's still very impressive. It came out in 2005, 2006, but it's still an amazing undertaking. There are other mods that have used voice acting, that have used so much community input. I know Quarrel in the Underground used a lot of that sort of thing. But if you don't want to, if you can't, then you don't need to, and it doesn't break immersion. You can have dialogue boxes, you can have actions that happen without animations, without speech, and people don't notice. A Skyrim mod now, like Muffinwind, where all of a sudden a big dialogue box comes up saying, brackets, this thing happens. It would be terrible. Whereas you could get away with it in Morrowind times, and that's just progress. And I guess that's where it's a good thing that more indie RPGs have come in to fill in the gap, because they still have that room for imagination. But it's a shame for those of us that just mod, and we've kind of been pushed out of that space.
Now, it's sort of off topic, and this is kind of another one of those questions that you answered before, but are there any other games outside the Elder Scrolls series that you enjoy playing? And if so, what do you like about them?
Yes, I like to think I'm a very varied gamer. I like kind of old school RPGs as my, if I had to define myself as a gamer, I would say I like old RPGs. But I guess these days I just like games that have good, strong mechanics. And I always like games with good plot, good dialogue, good writing generally. But the older I get, the more I like it when that's backed up by the game mechanics. Like, I still think Planescape Torment is a great example of the writing, the plot. It's all about your character, how he cannot die. I don't know if you play Planescape, but it always ties into the gameplay. For example, when you die, you can just respawn back at the mortuary where you start, and that ties itself into the quests in the most novel ways. Like, there's a woman that finds out that you are this deathless person, and she's like, "Oh, my friends will really love it if you'll let me stab you to death in front of them. They'll think I'm really cool." So she stabs you to death, and you wake up in the mortuary as if you were just respawning with a big sack of gold next to you. And she's saying, "Thanks, that was really exciting." So I guess I've always been inspired by games that manage to entwine narrative and mechanics in those two ways.
Now, if you could mod perhaps one other game, like one of those old school RPGs, that perhaps doesn't support mods currently, what would it be?
I would say probably maybe Fallout 1, because, again, tying into the Vignette RPG conversation we were having earlier, you could just add a random settlement in the middle of the map and make it this very small, rich, dense location that wouldn't feel out of place. So it would be really immersive. It would really work in the context. You could keep it small and focused, but you could tell your completely own story. Like, I remember when Fallout 3 had been announced, and this was around my dark period, basically my period of wandering about the internet, where I turned down a dark alleyway and everything went black. It was between Oblivion coming out, me being very excited, and not. So I remember thinking, is Fallout 3's coming out? It's like a Western Elder Scrolls. That's amazing. And I was thinking of all these sort of man with no name type mods where you could just drift into a town, have this really focused experience, really dense. But then it came out and I was like, no, I don't actually like it that much. Not going a rant against the game or anything, just it wasn't for me. It didn't really inspire me to mod it. But ever since Morrowind, I've just wanted to get a new game like that sparks the same creativity, the same inspiration in me, that I want to create my own wee place in that world and fully realise it. And I'm still waiting for that.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with you there. Fallout 3 didn't really inspire me to make any mods for it, and I sort of ran into the same problem with Skyrim, because there's just not a whole lot of room for content modders like ourselves to make new content for those games the way we want to make content for them, which is usually involving lots of quests and things like that.
Yeah, I definitely had the same thing because I remember I played Skyrim when it came out, and I played it thinking I'm going to hate this, but actually I just moved out with my parents. I'd moved in with my girlfriend, my best friend, and they were like, "You have to play Skyrim. I want to see how annoyed it makes you." So okay, I'll give it a go, and I actually quite liked it. It's not great. It's not a great RPG. It's not anything like Morrowind, but it actually does what it does quite well, I think. So after I played it, I still had this idea fresh in my mind of a mod about what was it? It was someone else. Someone else's surface claiming to be the Dragonborn and showing off amazing powers on a small sort of isolated island to the north. Basically, you'd travel there, find out all the lore. Basically, I would immerse the player in all of the really esoteric Michael Kirkbride lore that you can otherwise ignore, and challenge them in some way to prove their identity. I thought there'd be really good potential there for both adventure and really introspection. But I just never did it. It just never really came to me, which is a shame. I think it could have been good, but it just didn't ever really inspire me the same way that Morrowind did, I guess.
Oh yeah, that kind of goes back to Morrowind's ease of access when it comes to making content mods like that. It's not very difficult, whereas with Skyrim you're dealing with higher production values.
Of course, that I think was what really put me off, because I'm thinking, I had this really good idea for this fake or not fake Dragonborn, this rival you encounter. It's something I always really like in RPGs and games. It's like a rival character, a rival party. Like in Wizardry 7, you could encounter a lot of rival adventurer parties that are also looking for the same maps that you're looking for. Or to go polar opposite, in Devil May Cry, you've got Virgil, who's basically your character, Dante's evil opposite. And he makes for a great fight. And these rival adventurers in Wizardry make for a great opponent, because I still remember, won't go off topic too long, but I fought my way through one of Wizardry 7's weirdest, most annoying dungeons, got to the chest where the map was supposed to be, and it was empty. And I turned around, and I had just missed one of the enemy parties that had taken it. And I saw their back, so I chased them down, beat them, and took it, and that had its repercussions. That was amazing. So I've always thought I want to be able to make a villain like that. That's what this guy was going to be, not necessarily a villain, just someone that thinks he's in the same position as you. But then I was like, I have to find the perfect voice for him. If this was a Morrowind mod, I wouldn't have had to do that. But because it's a Skyrim mod, I have to test, and not to be insulting, but I'll have to listen to a lot of really cringe-worthy auditions. I'll have to go through a lot of people, and I'll have to do that for every character. I'll have to do that for everything. And my heart just kind of went out of it. And again, that's just progress.
Oh yeah, and that sort of thing is really disheartening. And moving on to this next question, which is kind of a callback to, again, earlier in the discussion, with the fact that content mods don't really get as much attention these days. Do you have a mod that hasn't received enough acclaim as you think it should have had? And if so, which one and why?
I'm going to say Muffinwind Enhanced Edition. Basically, the story behind it was I replayed Muffinwind. Basically, I made Muffinwind in 2005, 2006. I replayed it in 2009. Basically, a sort of sentimental, really nerdy last play of Morrowind before I go off to uni, where I will stop being nerdy, and you can see how well that went. But I played it and I was like, oh god, this is embarrassing. All these ellipses. There's like 7 full stops in each one. Jesus, I have to reword this. And there's so much I felt like I had to fix. I was like, okay, this is what I'll do. I will make Muffinwind the way I would make it now. And obviously that was when Seamer and I emailed me. And it was okay, so I'm going to do that. And when I finally made it, I couldn't get anyone to beta test it. I beta tested it, and I could complete it. But after the last time I beta tested something by myself, I figured I had to get someone else to play it first, and no one would. So I just kind of forgot about it for a year or two, and then I played it again when I was got about 20. You know, it was a couple of years later, and I was like, I could make this even better. And then I thought, no, just get your flatmate. I was living with my best pal at the time. I was like, Johnny, play this, play Muffinwind and Snakes. So I watched him do it, and it worked. So that was when I finally released it. And after all that time, it just didn't get much attention, and I didn't think it would. You know, it's an upgraded version of a 2005 mod, but 2005-2006 mod, but it was still kind of disheartening that it was released massive quest mod, the good version, and it got a few hundred downloads.
Going into this next question, I don't know if this really applies to you very much since you're sort of semi-retired. But are there any mods and modders that currently have your attention in the community?
There are. I still pay a lot of attention to Tamriel Rebuilt. It's obviously not had the most steady progress, but I still think it's amazing how much they've gotten on in the last few years. And obviously, being someone that's kind of driven by content, like I like Morrowind for the exploration and everything, but I still need to have a kind of quest in mind. So basically, when I'm going across a new landmass, I like to think, okay, I need to get from A to B. I'm going to wander completely off the path between A and B and see what I find. Whereas Tamriel Rebuilt for a while has just been, okay, there's no A to B, but wander about and see if you can find anything. So I hadn't paid too much attention to it, but they've been doing some really impressive stuff behind the scenes that I just really hope comes to fruition. And there's just Melchior Dark has really. I've been really impressed by him just making new creatures, new animations, and everything out of nowhere. And just everyone else that's keeping the community going, to be honest. Everyone that's keeping providing modders resources in the hope that people use them. Everyone that's coming out with new graphics replacers because they know someone's still playing Morrowind. That's inspiring because they're keeping the modding community alive.
Are there any mods that you look at and think, I wish I made that?
Yeah, I'm going to say non-Morrowind mods here. I'm going to say I was playing Fallout New Vegas over November, and I was playing some of the big mods for that. And some of them, like we were talking earlier about how there aren't as many big quest mods or anything, but some of the big ones for Skyrim are incredible. They really push boundaries, and some of the ones for New Vegas, like Autumn Leaves, is a relatively recent one, and they really put me to shame. It's like I really wish I could have made something like this. But in Morrowind terms, I think there's a few. I think Daedric Sorcery, I remember who made it, is incredible. It's this really, I don't know if you've played it, but it's this sort of multi-layered quest line with you can choose between several different people to work with, and the end result is you can summon Daedric princes to do quests for them, and it is really, really well done. And it's exactly the kind of mod I want to make. But there's a lot of that for Morrowind, and Fliggerty's made a few, like Blasphemous Revenants is something that I really admire because it's something you can play for a bit and put down, or it's something you can like base a whole character around, base a whole game around. It's something that can change your whole game. And obviously we've been talking about quest mods, dialogue mods, but I really appreciate mods like that that get deep into the game mechanics and totally change how you can play with a character. Like for those of us that have played Morrowind more times than we'd like to admit, something Blasphemous Revenants, I started a character with the goal, this guy is going to be a necromancer. He's going to use Blasphemous Revenants, and hopefully it works. And I love that character, so I'd like to make a mod like that.
Oh yes, Blasphemous Revenant and also Daedric Sorcery are both really great on-time classics. And sort of going on to a more modern-day mod, what do you think of Open Morrowind, and do you plan to make any Open Morrowind-only mods should you come back to the community once it's released?
Open Morrowind, I find it really interesting. Like, I'm really paying attention to its development, and I really want to see what kind of community comes out around it. Because obviously I'm not the biggest technical modder in the world. I'm not great with the scripting and everything, so a lot of what Open Morrowind is doing will go over my head, or it's not something I can make use of. But I'm not daft enough that I can't see how incredible it's going to be for the modding community. So I'm really looking forward to what's coming out, and hopefully the community flourishes because of it as much as it should. And if it does, I hope I'll be there.
Now, are there any features, systems, and/or mechanics that you're looking forward to being de-hard-coded in Open Morrowind, or perhaps looking forward to someone else to make a mod for?
Honestly, I'm just really looking forward to seeing what people do with it and seeing what I think of that. Like, I always like seeing when something like this comes out, what someone really imaginative, someone really technically skilled with some insane vision comes out with, because it's always something that I'll look at and go, damn, I wish I'd thought of that. I mean, there's the obvious things, like I'm looking forward to seeing Morrowind with a full physics engine. I'm looking forward to, for example, co-op multiplayer Morrowind, because I've been trying to convince my girlfriend to play it for a long time, so I think if we could play it co-op, I think that would be really good. I'd like to play it with a group of people from just a group of friends or something. God, I would hate an MMO version, but playing it with a group of friends would be good. And seeing it with a full physics engine, good. Just, I think seeing what people could do with it in 2016 that you maybe wouldn't want in the vanilla game, but seeing what people can actually do with it. The game's been out for long enough now that it's time to start really pulling at the seams of it and seeing just what ridiculous things you can get out of it before it all falls apart.
Oh yes, and well, co-op especially might be coming sooner than we think. I don't know if you've seen the recent videos that one of the Open Morrowind developers have been posting, but they have successfully managed to integrate instancing of multiple player characters in the same sort of game world, and that has been fascinating to watch. And this has just been in the past month, and it'll certainly be fun to see if this actually turns out into a real multiplayer game type for Morrowind.
Yes, I did see that actually. Now that you mention it, I saw it on Rock Paper Shotgun, and it was surreal just to see multiplayers coming to Morrowind. I'm thinking, God, is this 2004 again? Has someone come up with some stupid mod that's never going to work out again? What year is this? But it's actually happening now after all this time. And God, yeah, it's amazing the kind of things that people are going to be able to make with Open Morrowind that, frankly, are above my tiny brain to imagine.
Oh yes, but it's certainly an exciting time for the Morrowind modding community, and well, going into this final few questions here, what do you think about the other Elder Scrolls games like Oblivion, Skyrim, and the Elder Scrolls Online?
Basically, going through one at a time, I played Arena for about an hour. I didn't think that much of it. Daggerfall, I like. I like it more in concept than in practice. I love the Daggerfall character generation. You spend about an hour filling out the most esoteric questions about your character, the most absolute nonsense. You give them disadvantages and advantages. By the end of the character generation, I feel like I've put more thought into this avatar than I've ever put into my own life or career. But then you play it for a while and it's just all. The dungeons are good once. They're these massive 16 floor dungeons, and it's great to explore one of those, but then you explore another and it's the same. And it's randomly generated. It's not clever, it's not well made. So Dagger, and yeah, and you do quests, and a lot of the time it's, well, doing quests for the Mages Guild. And they're like, go to this person's house, cast a sleep spell because he has insomnia. You will get that quest over and over until you get go to question mark question mark question mark and cast sleep spell because X, and you can't do that. So Daggerfall but I like it more in idea than I like playing it. Oblivion I hated. I got banned from the official forums for disliking it, which that sounded really edgy at the time, but I got warnings for things like posting obscene links in threads that I'd never been in, and when asked what I'd posted or what thread it was, the response was, you don't need to know that. So there was a bit of weirdness going on there. Skyrim, I do like a lot more because it's more of just an actual action game. I treat it like just a big open world action game like Grand Theft Auto, Shadows of Mordor, Saints Row, something like that, and actually does it quite well. It's enjoyable, and I really didn't enjoy Oblivion at all, so it's a step up.
Now, what do you think makes the Morrowind Modding community so vibrant after more than a decade? I mean, especially recently, in 2015, the community released over 500 new mods for Morrowind, which is more than was released in 2013 or 2014, and the community is still really going strong even after 13 years.
I think what it comes down to is the fact that the series and games in general took a totally different direction after Morrowind. It's nothing's really filled in the same gaps since. You know, it was, like you said earlier, the kind of perfect balance of RPG exploration and action, and since then, it's either been one or the other. I think Morrowind struck a chord with people, and probably it just struck a chord with a lot of people because it came in the right time and the right place, and that's not going to happen again anytime soon. It happened at the right time and the right place to capture a certain relatively small group of people that were on the internet before everyone was. It was a one-off, and it was a great community at the time. And it's great that it's still going. It's great that there is still a Morrowind community, but it's sad that I don't think anything's really going to have a community like this again.
Do you think there's anything that the Morrowind modding community should be doing in order to continue to expand and grow in the coming years?
Yeah, I think the main thing is open Morrowind needs to remain as it is. It needs to remain open. Now, I know we're all doing this for free. Some people have different feelings about whether they want their content to be used in other mods, and they have the right to, but I'm going to say it. People being jealous and possessive of their mods, of their content, their one true vision is harmful to the modding community. We're already messing with Bethesda's artistic vision. The results are just as beautiful or horrifying as we make it. If someone wants to mess with my artistic vision, if someone was to replace every character in Muffinwind with hideous anime dick girls, then let them. I mean, okay, in that particular example, I would feel it deeply hilarious and play it immediately. But what I mean is, I don't care if people know who made my mods as long as they enjoyed them. Knowing that someone out there loves what I made for them and that I gave them a few hours of amusement and pleasure is a huge honour. Modded Elder Scrolls more than any other modded game is a communal effort. When Ashlander companion Julian got killed by a trap in the Black Mill and across certain social boundaries by using blasphemous revenants to resurrect him as a revenant, so many mods were interplaying that I can barely even say I was playing Morrowind anymore. When I play as a Tilvani wizard with all the best Uberith mods and Rise of House Tilvani, it was bloody brilliant. Now, that's just the mods I'm using interacting organically and can't really be compared to the trickier issue of modders actually making use of each other's work. And I understand why it's a thorny issue, but I can't help but see modding as this wonderful place of freely sharing, delighting in each other's creations, and this collective sense of community that they engender. Especially in the relatively small Morrowind Modding Community, and that it gets spoiled by that one guy sitting with a shotgun and grumbling that nobody touches his pumpkins without asking. The Morrowind community has created some genuinely amazing stuff, and I can only imagine how much more amazing it could be if everything was a modder's resource. Open Morrowind could be a really Open Morrowind could be a really, really huge thing, but we need to leave our pride at the door and just try to build something collaborative. It has to be something communal. I think the community will really be able to put out huge, amazing things, but we do need to leave egos and drama at the door because they have the potential to really drag it down. That would be a huge shame, and I know I spoke about that earlier, but it's something I feel quite passionately about. People really get in each other's way when they're all aiming for the same goal with these things, and I feel like it's a huge shame.
Oh yeah, so I definitely agree that collaboration is really a major important element in the community. And for example, if someone wants to make two mods that currently conflict with each other and make them compatible with one another, that should be something that they should be able to do, because that just makes the community even better. But going on to another note here, is there any advice that you'd like to give to budding new Morrowind modders out there looking to release their first mod?
Really, all I can say is what I said earlier in that what I learned from making my first big mods is plan ahead. Like, now, if I'm planning something big in scope in the future, I have a wonderful girlfriend who I can bounce ideas off, and she'll be like, have you really thought about how much work this is going to be? And I'll say, kind of. And she'll say, go away and think about that some more. So it's a good idea if you don't have someone like that to think about it yourself, to sit down, plan it out, make a spreadsheet, make a flow chart, whatever. This is going to be more work than you think it is. Make your scope small, avoid feature creep. And that sounds like it's like I'm saying to limit your vision, like I'm telling you to limit yourself. No, it's not. Just don't let this get out of hand, and you will release something, which is great. And then you can work your way up to releasing something bigger. And that's how great things happen. You can't just come up with some amazing idea and go, I'll make it somehow. I'll think about the details later.
Oh yes, definitely good advice, and really advice that we've heard a lot of times on this series. And finally, is there anyone in the community you'd like to give a shout out to?
I'm going to drag things down. I'm going to give a shout out to Quatlus, who gave me a lot of good advice and is now dead. I would like to give a shout out to Grumpy, who helped me with scripting a lot and is now dead. And I would like to give a shout out to Quarrel, who was weird and hated Muffinwind, but I respected him anyway. And now he's dead. And besides that, yeah, just a lot of the people that helped me out and worked alongside me when I was making Muffinwind. I think a lot of the sort of unsung heroes of that time that just helped out newbie modders. Like, I remember in particular, what was her name? Gren was one person on the Elder Scrolls forums. and she just really supported me making Muffinwind from the start. And I got talking to her after it was released, and I was like, "Did you ever play Muffinwind?" And she responded, "No. Being a teacher got too much for me, and I was in rehab for a year." So, I'm 15. I don't know what this means. And knew what it meant, but I was like, this is way too much real life for me. I just make mods about muffins for a video game. So yeah, I think just a lot of people in the community that introduced me to a lot of interesting walks of life as a kid and as an adult, and I learned a lot, both good and bad. But overall, it's a community that's really encouraged my creativity, and I hope with Open Morrowind coming out, it really inspires a new lease of life, because I'd really like to be part of that, and I'd really like to see it.
Alright, well that pretty much wraps up all the questions I have for you, so thanks again for agreeing to do this interview.
No problem, this was really interesting to do, and I'm glad to see that people are still interested enough in the Morrowind community to be doing things like this. Like I was saying earlier, thinking about doing mods for Divinity Original Sin, and you're immediately going for a much smaller community than you would be if you were making like a big Skyrim mod. But for example, you're doing this Morrowind mod showcase when you'd get 10 times as many views doing a Skyrim mod showcase, but you're doing what you actually want to be doing, and a lot of people are making what they actually want to make. And that's what's going to keep this community alive. And that's great to see.